Welcome to Medicine with the Metals, where we explore the transformational power of plant medicines and their natural healing.
I'm Michelle, and we'll dive into the science and stories behind nature's most powerful remedies.
And I'm Mark. Join us as we uncover the secrets of natural healing and its potential to revolutionize modern healthcare. Hey, Michelle, now it's time for our community updates and news segments. And we have some pretty amazing ones from this past week, especially at PsychCon.
That's right. We were at PsychCon in Vegas last week, and that was a really good time. We met a lot of amazing people. Our booth was voted the best booth there.
Definitely. It was Mama Dose. Mama Dose is pretty amazing. People are really knowing that Mama Dose. And how
That's
about
right.
us? How about you actually getting to our photograph of Lamar Odom?
That's right. So Lamar Odom was the keynote speaker. He is a basketball player who played for the LA Lakers. And 5 years ago, he had a drug overdose and essentially died. They brought him back to life, and then he was in a coma. For I believe 7 days. When he came out of that coma, he went and did ketamine. After the ketamine, he went and did iboga, and he has been living a life of sobriety ever since. I'm going to start crying. It was such a powerful experience to meet with him, talk with him. He agreed to come on a podcast with us, so that'll be coming up.
He has a pretty powerful story,
He
didn't
has a
he?
very powerful story.
A great week, great learning experience at PsychCon this past week. We met a lot of great people, a lot of great connections, and we learned some really valuable life lessons.
We did, and we got to meet a lot of you guys from our community who were there. Jenna Clue, we love you. We just had a wonderful time, and it was an incredible learning experience for us.
Definitely. We'll dive into more news next week.
We will. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Beatrice Labate join us. Dr. Labate is a queer Brazilian anthropologist with a PhD in social anthropology from Unicamp in Brazil.
And she's also the executive director of Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicine, and she serves as public education and cultural specialist at MAPS. Her work focuses on plant medicine, drug policy, shamanism, and social justice.
Dr. Labate has authored and co edited 28 books and numerous peer reviewed articles. We are super excited to have her here today and dive into her extensive knowledge and experience with plant medicines. So, welcome, Bia. We're so happy to have you talk with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
So, before we get into the thick of it, I'd like to know what brought you to this space. What brought you to psychedelics, and how long ago was that?
I guess I am not very original because, like many people, what brought me to psychedelics was trying psychedelics and liking them. Basically, that's the gist of it. And that was many years ago when I was around 19, backpacking in Mexico, doing some world explorations, my early 20s. And I tried peyote and mushrooms and LSD. And many years later, I tried ayahuasca in Brazil. And I have pretty much dedicated my whole professional life, my whole career to psychedelics.
Hmm, beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your personal experience, okay, as a gay woman in Brazil, anthropologist. How did this influence your research and advocacy in psychedelics?
Well, I wasn't really like identifying officially as queer publicly until very recently. So uh, I did my whole career studying ayahuasca and not talking about this issue. So it's a kind of funny word because I think it's more like there was a process that when I immigrated to California, it became very unsustainable to be in the closet. People here don't
Hmm,
like it. And also
right.
I took many years like in my own processes of being able to talk about this and be out about it. So we did our conference, Queer in Psychedelics, in 2019. I moved here in 2017. So I was dating my partner for many years, 7 years in the closet. Um, I think a lot I was afraid of being out and being rejected as a researcher in the field. I did a lot of field work in Brazil and Peru. Colombia. I traveled a lot, and the world of ayahuasca is quite patriarchal. I mean, with variations depending on the setting, but in general, it can be quite patriarchal, and there are also a lot of homophobic expressions. And I was afraid that being out, I was also in Brazil, which is not like the United States, that is more open. Although Brazil is changing too, I was just not aware that, not comfortable if I would be well received in the groups and accepted doing research. So I don't know how to answer that. I think I've always had a kind of sensibility that influenced who I am, and for sure there is a lot of that in my research approach. But it was more the contrary. It was more like uh, being oppressed and not out about who I am, and hard for me um, to feel good, to feel that I thought I would like be rejected and doors would close and I wouldn't be welcome to sit in ceremonies. um, and even to date, it's much easier to go in a podcast here, sitting in my comfort, you know in San Francisco, than to go to Mexico or to Brazil or to Peru, and be out. Although I have, in the last years, also told different shamans and attended retreats openly with my wife and been together as a couple. But still is a work in progress, I would say, depending on the audience.
Well, Bia, let
Well,
me ask you this: when do you feel that psychedelics and the having a psychedelic experience can help with the trauma that can come when you come out, or just with not being who you're supposed to be or comfortable with who you are? Do you feel like that psychedelics can help with that trauma? And I know you advocate for
LGBT.
yes, in this community. So do you find that it helped you?
You're getting me on the corner very fast, but okay. Like, it's very personal because I met Clancy, my
Mhm.
wife. She was doing some research about gay and lesbians' perceptions of themselves and issues of internalized homophobia and shame and all that kind of thing, and their use of ayahuasca. So that was the topic of her dissertation. She's a clinical psychologist, a PsyD, and she was looking for research subjects. And she reached out to me because I was this young anthropologist studying ayahuasca in Brazil, and I had a newsletter. And so I put some announcements in my newsletter for her to find some research subjects. And that's actually how we met. Um, and that's like her whole focus. She has published, her many articles and finished her dissertation about it. But she's a psychologist and I am an anthropologist, and we've always had our intellectual differences. We also have intellectual differences about what it is queer, or you know whether like it's more influence of culture or nature, and that kind of debate. um, and she has very much the focus that you're asking, and people here like to talk a lot about it. How psychedelics help people with such issues. And we also promoted Queer in Psychedelics 1 and Queer in Psychedelics 2, and a book called Queer in Psychedelics: From Oppression to Liberation. And there's a lots of reports about how people use psychedelics to cope with rejection, and also to find other communities of kindred people, since a lot of people are rejected from their homes, as they come out. Sometimes, like, parents or family members entirely reject them or even like kick them out, and that sort of thing, which is, it's a paradox. So in terms of oppression, we were talking about this in our conference, Psychedelic Culture. Like, if you are from another kind of minority, you can go to your house and say, hey, I feel I've been bullied in school because I'm black, or because I'm Asian, or this kind of thing. And sometimes in the LGBT community, You don't even get that support from within your home. So there's something deeply sad and challenging. I'm not trying to make a competition about which minority is more oppressed, because that is not the case. But I'm just saying that it's very hard for people. And so a lot of people have used psychedelics to help them, and have, through psychedelics, find communities of support and help navigate all of that. And I like to say that psychedelics didn't heal me. I like to say California healed me.
Mm. Well, definitely kudos to you for doing this, because everybody's on their own individual path and they shouldn't be demonized for their choices. So let's talk about a little bit the Chacruna Institute. It's what you do and what you've created, and it's about bridging the gaps. Let me tell you if I'm right. Bridging the gaps with the indigenous communities with the Western kind of medicines. Is that correct?
Yeah, the Chacruna Institute is dedicated mainly to public education, and we have three main programs. We call one program Indigenous Reciprocity and Decolonial Dialogues. The other program we call Psychedelic Justice, which is discussions around race and gender in psychedelics. And the third program, Protection of Sacred Plants and Cultural Traditions. Uh, and that's a lot about harm reduction towards the globalization of plant medicines, and um, supporting psychedelic churches self-organize. And
How did this start?
Mhm.
it's very much a continuation of my own trajectory as a researcher. I have a PhD in anthropology, and I have been researching traditional uses of sacred plants, plant medicine, ceremony, ritual, religion, shamanism, drug policy, mainly ayahuasca, but a lot of peyote mushrooms and other sacred plants. And so I've dedicated my whole career to publishing. I have published many books and articles and organized conferences. And this is a kind of para academic organization that we're trying to make academic knowledge more accessible, publish shorter articles with stronger titles and messages, and be more accessible to a larger audience, but keeping the rigor, being still, you know, produced by experts, but talking to a larger audience. And then with time, we expanded our offerings from, it started as a blog, and then we became created different programs, and now we have courses and workshops and online events, in-person events, circles, gatherings. We have an annual conference. And a lot of the focus, as you said, has to be between these bridges, north and south, English speaking, non-English speaking. I'm Brazilian, but I used to live and work 8 years in Mexico. So a large part of Chacruna is Mexican and Brazilian. We have a branch called Chacruna Latino America. It's very organic. This is kind of who we are.
Yeah, and us too. I think this whole space is organic. And where is your roadblocks here? Where are your roadblocks happening? Say, plant medicine is widely accepted in Mexico, widely accepted in Peru, South America, Brazil, Africa. It's not widely accepted here in the States. So, is this your roadblock? Where's your roadblocks happening?
I must say that it's not widely accepted in Brazil or Mexico. I mean, we have this idea. Of course, everything is relative, right? Depending on where you look from. I think from an American perspective, from the north, it looks much more accepted, but it's still not accepted. Last week, I was visiting the Brazilian consulate in San Francisco. We invited them to come to our conference, Psychedelic Culture, and they had a very hard time in announcing our event on their Instagram. Eventually, allowed it to announce on the stories, but not on the grid, because there was a whole internal discussion. It's also stigmatized from a mainstream perspective in Brazil or Mexico. But yeah, definitely here the legality is a big thing, and the cultural prejudices, the ignorance, the lack of knowledge, the lack of legitimacy, credibility, and people just have very different, what is considered, on one, for some people, a deep sacrament, one of the more sacred and beautiful and powerful and blessed opportunities, healing, spiritually elevating, self knowledge, like this precious thing, and here is read as a kind of demonized, criminalized, pathologized, stigmatized, persecuted, and just considered like
And
toxic.
you know what is so odd about all this is these medicines have been being used for thousands and thousands of years until what? The last 100 years maybe has been kind of like put in this category of let's schedule one these, let's demonize these, let's tell these people they're bad. But if we look at history, and history will tell us, psychedelics have been used forever.
Yes, the very idea of a psychedelic renaissance is very naive. It's a renaissance for who?
For who? Exactly.
There's people that have been using this, didn't stop using, didn't have any kind of backlash, and are not having a revival, and now are not claiming that this is the solution for everything, and trying to have control themselves not to say things to create backlashes. That's a very Western, biomedical perspective from the global North, from medicine, from generally white male scientists. That is related. It's telling the story from a certain perspective. I think there you go. Chacruna is trying to retell the story about the psychedelic field to itself and to the world, helping re-narrate, retell the ways we express this narrative to the world. So we're trying to include the angles of people of color, of indigenous people, of women, LGBT, people from the global south, people with an accent, disabled people, all kinds of minorities. And not just the focus of biomedicine, but also the focus of social sciences, of anthropology, that have been studying these substances also for a long time. And it's just a different kind of science that, unfortunately, in the scale of things, has less legitimacy, but is equally important, in my opinion. Uh, so
Absolutely.
this gap continues to
Mhm.
exist.
Let me ask you this, Bia. Do you find when the psychedelics are over here in the Western world that the indigenous is being lost? The how do I want to say this? Because we
This
believe in the
the spirit.
reciprocity of
Oh,
the
for sure.
indigenous, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
for sure.
we support the Shawanawa tribe out of Brazil. 5% of everything of all of our platforms goes to the Shawanawa tribe. We believe in in keeping alive the spirit of the indigenous of these medicines. I know that's what you're about too. So, do you find that when you in the United States, people have lost that during this renaissance?
Absolutely. I think it's a very reductionistic approach, and it breaks my heart. I think there's a constant, reductionism, banalization, vulgarization, commodification, mainstreaming that I find problematic. And it's heartbreaking to see, the difference in funding that you get for biomedical research versus the research you get for the funding you get for social sciences, for medicalization versus for ceremony. You follow the money and
But at the end of the day, Bia, where they're going for that research is exactly where the research is coming from. The Western world goes for the research in the jungle. I mean, that's where we're going for our research in. So we're using these tools anyways, but we're indoctrinating these medicines in such a chemical compound. So at the end of the day, they're they're just continual lies. It's a continual lie. What you say is follow the money. If you follow the money, it goes back to exactly that. There's no the science is the money. That's all it is.
yeah, I think there is some space for science. I'm not against the science. I'm supportive of the science. I think science is important. It's just there is an attempt of a certain kind of knowledge to want to dominate and to be hegemonic, and there's kind of epistemicide, this killing of other forms of knowledge, other forms of seeing the world, and stripping them of truth and saying this is the only way and this is more important and hierarchically superior. That is where the problem lies. If we had some more tolerance for multiple systems living together at once, I don't think we have to, you know, condemn medicine altogether, but there is this tendency both in the in the medical systems, in the criminal systems, in legal systems, in society at large, to give more validity to certain forms of knowledge. And then we are a small grassroots organization based here in Northern California with ties in Mexico and Brazil that are constantly saying, hey, what about plant medicines? What about indigenous
Mhm,
people? What about the global
mhm,
south? What about ceremony? What about ritual? What about religion? What about other languages? Also, this narrative is very like US centric and global north. If you think about the
Mhm.
world at large, it makes no sense to talk about a psychedelic renaissance. It's a story
mhm,
that is dominant, and it's told from this one point of view. And we're trying to create other understandings. And I think we have managed to, of course, we're not the only one, there's many people aligned, but those of us that are having these conversations are trying to help move the needle a little bit wider. I think there has been some changes. For example, this topic of queer issues that we were talking. It's a new reality now in the ayahuasca world. There's queer retreats, there's queer circles everywhere. People are much less tolerant also to patriarchy, to sexual abuse, to misconduct. There's much more venues to like um, file your complaints, more acceptant towards women that step up, or sometimes not women, men as well, that step up and call out abusers. So there's a lot of things that are moving and shaking in this field because of organizations like Chacruna.
Yeah, you are opening the dialogue. You're opening the dialogue. Well, let's talk about the legal part of this, because I know part of what you do is helping with your institute, is helping people who maybe in the Western society who have gotten in trouble over these indigenous medicines.
Yeah, we have a program that is our Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants, together with our ayahuasca community committee. That we have a group of lawyers, but also other ethicists and different professions that have a hub that have helped people. We have helped like more than 70 cases organically. We don't publish a lot about it. It's kind of really delicate. We're not supposed to like give legal advice either, and so we're just like trying to inform lawyers and communities and families and members that get in trouble. We offer a network of support and resources, and we also publish a lot about these things and help people understand. We have an active program of teaching psychedelic churches. We published a document called Religious Freedom Restoration Acts and Best Practices Guidelines. It's available for free. I suggest you all to go download it from our website. Uh, and we're helping this community self-organize. How do you store your sacrament? How do you transport it? Do you need to pay taxes? Do you need to have insurance? Do you have a should you incorporate as a nonprofit? Do you have a board of directors? Do you have a mechanism to file complaints? Do you have processes to have feedback? And then, what is your religious doctrine? Are you documenting it? Do you
Mhm,
have
mhm.
this organized? We practice what we call legal harm reduction. So since this is on a gray area, what can you do to try to be better informed and better organized, to be able, if you have problems with law enforcement, you already have a plan. Don't let it hit you. Create something proactive, and by creating it you also organize yourself. So there is a kind of invitation to not look at this as like, oh my god, these are oppressive systems, but maybe these are tools that can help you navigate better your own community and co-create your waivers, your community agreements, your understanding about what are the best practices I should have. We just had a workshop last week teaching people. There's all kinds of expressions of churches emerging in the United States, and it's a wide variety for a big appetite with lots of different communities and angles. But there's a lot of really sincere people trying to do good work, trying to do better. These substances are very powerful, they are very influential, they have touched people's hearts, and there's a lot of hungry mouths out there wanting information, asking for it. And there's so little institutional support for any of this. There's no big endowments or big grants or big institution or government or patrons or mecenas supporting a vibrant, ever growing, expanding by the minute, underground. I don't want to say underground because I want to think that these are legitimate religious expressions, but there's all of this happening, and so little support, so institution, so little places to look for information, to get your information. So we're also just a community of people, of kindred people that like this kind of stuff, and we attract people.
Absolutely. Well, your thinking is just on our level. This is how we think. This is what, because the biggest thing out there right now is the education and information. The stigma. We got to relieve the stigma of these medicines. I mean, the reason we're not getting grants, the reason we're not getting government funding, the reason we're not getting any of this is because these medicines work. So if you have something that works, that you don't have to go back and have another prescription to get this and
For
another
the rest of
prescription
your
to get
life.
this for the rest of your life. That's why we're not getting the grants for this. But we really got to remove the stigma behind these, because for us and for me and how we think, I've dove into all these medicines from iboga to ayahuasca, 5-MeO. I've done them all, but I really believe psilocybin is going to be the medicine for the Western world, and we have to be able to educate these people that this is a medicine you can use at home. You don't have to go and spend $3,000-4,000 to sit with psilocybin, to do this, to do that. The more we educate, the more we inform, and the more we remove the stigma, the better we'll all be.
Yeah, the problem with education is that it's hard to measure, right? And so I don't know. Those of you that have already applied for grants or trying to talk to philanthropists and people, folks with money, all they want to know is impact and deliverables and measurable. And I had this discussion with a philanthropist once, and I told him, "How much does an idea cost? What is the price of an idea?" Because to insert an idea into somebody's mind is very hard. If you have years of religious dogma, years of moral dogma, years of criminal law enforcement persecution, years of biopolitics, hegemonic reductionism understanding about the substances, mainstream psychiatry, all the powers to be, stigmatizing this, years of colonization, years of trying to strip, the substances from society, and then you're trying to create shifts, cultural paradigms that are informing a new level of thinking. But this shift takes a lot of time, and it's not palpable, it's not concrete. It's like a process, a very big process. Some people think that the advancing of the therapeutic potentials is the way forward, because then you can show that these plants have therapeutic potentials. And so a lot has been geared towards that. Let's, for example, cannabis, let's try to make it legit, as a medicine, and then maybe you can expand to other forms. There's also this bet in MDMA or psilocybin as therapeutic tools, and I think that certainly helps. And it is another contribution, but there's more to it. There's more. It's kind of deeper, and then it's also not just a medical thing. So we are trying to work on that level of consciousness, because if you think about it, prohibitionism is still a big success, even if you have little, bubbles here and there of this being broken, like Colorado or Oregon. Still, the large majority of the countries in the world sign up to uh, the scheduling international system, and there continues to be a large amount of countries that are backing this up. And in certain places, drug traffickers are being killed and people are being put in prison for life for smoking a joint. And so it's still very, it's a very strong system. Prohibition is very deeply imbibed into different countries, different societies, different social classes, different cultural groups. And so it's a big task, to talk, to change cultural norms. That's also why we named our conference Psychedelic Culture, because we at the Chacruna Institute want to create and help spread a psychedelic culture. It's an understanding that these substances are part of our lives, of who we are, our identity, our territories, means of celebration, of transmission of knowledge, of socialization, of spirituality. of self knowledge, of therapy. And we need to create a future of this movement that has these values, these cultural values around these plants. And so we are very much trying to advance the cultural conversations, the political reflections, all of.
Well, you're doing it. You're
Yeah,
doing it, and
definitely.
you're doing it with the education. I love
Hmm.
how you guys are out there, and how much you offer as far as programs where you're published all over the place. Let me ask you this: since you're bridging that gap between the indigenous and the Western world, what is, in your opinion, do the indigenous think of bringing these medicines to the Western world?
I mean, this is a big question. Depends, different countries have different policies. I think it depends on which indigenous group and which country and which substance. For
Hmm.
example, here in the United States, the Native Americans have very clearly asked the psychedelic movement to stay out of the regulation of peyote, and they have claimed that they want to be the ones to be in charge of that regulation, and had a very strong uh, clash with the so-called movement Decrim Nature that had this understanding that the substances belong to all humanity and we should all use it and it's helpful for everybody. And then the Native American church is saying, sure, it helps a lot of people, but this comes from a certain territory and from a certain kind of people, us. And we want to have the rights to be the one that negotiate with the government and determine conservation policies and determine regulation policies. So they have asked the psychedelic movement to stay outside of these conversations, and they have not been heard. And there has been a lot of fights about this subject. In Latin America, a lot of indigenous people have asked for allies from the global north, or foreigners, or people from outside the Amazon, to help as partnerships in collaboration to co-create projects that bring income, that feel in alignment, and that are standing in solidarity. It's different countries where this is criminalized versus not criminalized. It's different on whether this is a scarce resource or less scarce resource. So there's a lot of elements. I think you have a spectrum. You have people that are going to say stay entirely out of it, don't put your hands, don't consume. And then you have people that are going to say, are going to train foreigners, are going to train Westerners, and want them to be apprentices and take this elsewhere. And there are people that will want to engage in partnerships, but they want to have like a leadership over that partnership. And it's a work in progress. There's a lot of things moving.
It's definitely interesting what Jamaica's doing. Jamaica's interesting place right now. What they're opening up to all these plant medicines and widely accepted. Pretty interesting.
Psilocybin, especially.
Yeah, all the medicines.
But I also hear
And by
there's
the
some clashes with local Jamaicans. uh,
Yeah, that's truth. But the government is very widely accepting plant medicines. They're kind of
Well, because
inheriting
the
it.
money, again,
Yeah,
it goes back to the
to the
money.
money. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. It's income for
Hmm.
Jamaica, and a lot of people are opening their psilocybin retreats in Jamaica.
what
Yeah.
I hear is that, like, for example, local Jamaicans, like black Jamaicans that use cannabis, are Rastafari, that have been forbidden to use cannabis in the retreats for foreigners, with psilocybin, because that's kind of against the policies. So I also hear there's some like issues around cultural sensitivity. This is the kind of thing that I studied as an anthropologist, and Chacruna is interested in this cultural clashes and dialogues, and which I was talking to the beginning. For Clancy and psychologists, they're going to talk about the self. I am interested in the collective and this cultural encounters between different kinds of traditions. That has been my focus more as an anthropologist.
What does chacruna mean?
It's a catch-all word that talks. It's the leaf that is one of the components of ayahuasca, which
Hmm.
I
Yep.
created this little joke that is, I think, is funny, but it's hard to understand. I said that I spent over 20 years fanatical about ayahuasca, and now not ayahuasca anymore. I'm fanatical about chacruna, which is
Mm.
it's the org,
There
but in
you
the
go.
end, it's ayahuasca
So
again. A lot of ayahuasca for
Ayahuasca.
me.
yeah.
It's the
So
grandmother. Yeah, that's she's beautiful.
this is plant medicine, whatever you want to call it, Renaissance, psychedelic Renaissance, whatnot. Where do you see all this going? Because the science is there. People are definitely
Waking
uh,
up.
waking up and being attracted to this in some way, shape, or form. So where do you see all this going? 2025, 2026.
Yeah, really good question. I mean, it's kind of scary, right? It seems that it's going to be incredibly mainstream, to brought to a whole other level with the potential regulation of MDMA as early as of August. Uh,
Hmm.
Hmm.
so I think we're going to go to another whole level. I mean, it's already
Yeah.
expanded so much. I have been working on this field for, as I said, over 3 decades. And if you look at the psychedelic conferences there, it's an entire different scenario. There's so many startups and venture capitalists and LinkedIn experts and all kinds of businesses. And I think it's going to keep on growing a lot. There's a lot of, I think it's going to grow in all directions. A lot of new groups um, are going to
Do you
emerge.
do you think via this? Do you think they're going to be able to stop us?
I mean, there are some scandals, right? And there are some challenges. I don't know if you all saw that now SoQuest has been considered
Yep.
liable to the
Hmm.
death of somebody, and I think they have to
Yep.
pay 15 million or something. But they were,
No, I did not know
Yeah,
that.
that just happened the other day. Yep.
Just
yeah, it's really sad that somebody died. They
Yep.
had Cambo after ayahuasca. They're still
yes,
doing
yes.
ceremonies, I think,
Oh,
as
I
of
know.
last weekend. So it's hard to understand. Uh,
Mhm.
it's very
Well, he's
complex.
in their
Huh?
face. Chris Young is in their face. I mean, he's in the Fed's face, just
You know,
basically saying, "Meh," he does not care. And in that way, he's kind of leading the way there. But I don't know how I
It
feel
is.
about it.
It is a very interesting situation with that because you see him operating for the. I was a big part of that church for a long time, and you see him operating in the way he operates for the last 10 years, and they're not shutting him down, especially in the middle of two communities now. So, you know, I'm just asking this question because I don't think they want to stop it. I think they know something's here. I think there's no way to stop it. I mean, this is pretty interesting territory.
What are your thoughts though on it becoming mainstream? And because you see how psilocybin now in Oregon, we've got good friends we were just at PsyCon in Vegas with, who they had to close their place down in Oregon because it was so outrageously expensive for them to operate. So we talk about this underground. I prefer the underground at this point, right? I mean, I think it's insane that somebody's going to go pay $3,000 to sit with somebody else in psilocybin ceremony. That's outrageous to me. That's criminal to me.
Well, I like to say, as I say, there's space for everybody. If we are like a diverse family and we have all kinds of people in the world and all kinds of, needs, there's certainly people that are going to feel more comfortable with those models and they want to go and sit in somewhere and that they feel that is has credentialed and has some criteria. So I think there should be space for plurality. I am all in favor of this plurality of, we're not going to have just one way. I mean, even I was talking about the differences I have with my wife, and we're both super lovers of these things, and we've been together for 14 years, and we have our preferences between us. What kind of ritual you like more, what kind of styles. Like, and I'll go to her style, she'll go to mine, and sometimes we'll go separate, and because we have different tastes. So there's space for different things. I think they are struggling in Oregon, but also we always talk about what's going wrong. I think it's coming along. I have seen presentations from Angela Albee in different conferences. They, I think, have maybe had 3 or 4 thousand experiences. There's different centers. There's a lot of schools that were training people closed because they can't afford it and there are too many schools. Then the people that get graduated from these training programs don't have services centers to go. It's very expensive to attend the service centers and there is this like disparity. So they are doing adjustments. it's things that are being created. I think I like to quote my friend Nate Howard that works in Inner Track. I'm an advisor with them. I forgot what he says, but it's a very good phrase to say. Like, it's playing out. It's like cannabis. It
Yeah,
takes,
yeah,
Yeah.
it's gonna be messy for a while,
yeah,
but then it's gonna find its way. And then I think all we can hope for is that it's the best possible, because we are
absolutely.
all operating under capitalism,
Oh, of
systemic
course.
legacies of racism, of colonization, of white supremacy, of patriarchy, of social inequalities. So psychedelics are not able to fix all of that and fix all these larger structures under which we operate. And that's not fair to ask psychedelics to be better than everything else, because it's part of the world. So, I'm kind of like incrementalist and optimist and pragmatist. I think we have to keep on
Yeah,
doing our work, because if we don't, what's going to happen? Then we're just old cynical haters, and life is much less enjoyable. I like challenges and I like to have
me too.
challenges.
Me
We
too,
we
too.
love challenges.
We do.
So
So what's
here,
coming up
they
for the Chacruna Institute? What
absolutely.
exciting developments do you have coming up?
Well, we're excited that we created this new conference, Psychedelic Culture, because in the past we're doing super niche things like queer psychedelics, indigenous
I love that.
shamanism, women in psychedelics. We had very specific angles. We had a whole conference just about regulation and different modalities. And so creating psychedelic culture is a larger umbrella that we want to accommodate, you know all of the different branches of what we do and what's happening in the movement. It is our modest effort to mainstream, but keeping our angle, keeping our progressive, cutting edge angle. So I'm hoping that this will become an annual conference, and also bringing other modalities into the conference, like eh, artistic expressions, dance. We had
Breath
a
work,
performer,
meditation.
we
Yeah,
had a rapé circle, like understanding that it's a living culture, that it's embodied. It's a kind of knowledge that is not just scientific, verbal, rational, academic, but it's a living culture, embodied knowledge, cultural perceptions, modes, senses, flavors. So developing understanding that this knowledge passes through the body, and how can we create modes of expression and sharing knowledge through the body. It's a progress in the Chacruna field. So, developing our conference, our annual conference, is something we're enthusiastic about. We're also talking about creating a certificate on psychedelic plant medicines, or a religious training. We have resisted to that, because the real training for that is on the on the ground, vomiting with your bucket. And so it's very hard to create trainings to be a therapist, to
yeah.
have a weekend of meditation or
Mhm.
breath work or cannabis or ketamine. It doesn't do it. But now finally we're coming along to understand that there is a need to have some kind of training or certificate on religious or plant medicines. We're having discussions around that. um, and yeah, we continue with our indigenous reciprocity education, which is a constant one. We have already a trilogy, so it was Queen Psychedelics, Women in Psychedelics, and Psychedelics Justice. Now we're going to do another book that brings more like sacred plants, indigenous voices. We're working on this book as well. We have a lot of different branches. We're kind of a organic hub that has a lot of different expressions, and we're also looking actively always for members and donors, grants, support. So if you're listening and you like the message, we have a community of people. We have opportunities for volunteering, but we're still very modest, in the sense that we're still a new organization with a lot to do. It's a big challenge. I'm not going to.
Yeah, well,
It is.
I love what you're doing. You're doing
Mhm.
a lot of the great things we're doing. I'd love to collaborate you a little bit more after this talk, but why don't we end here? Why don't we say, if you could talk to any historical figure about plant medicine, who would it be? We'll each answer this question. So
You first,
we'll
then.
start
You
with you.
first, then.
Okay. I would want to talk to Jesus. I would want to know if everything in the scripture was written after they had a DMT experience.
Of course it was.
So that would be who I would want to talk to. Who would you want to talk to, Michelle?
I don't know about a historical figure, but I would like to talk to my mom who has
Hmm.
passed. I'd
Hmm.
love to talk to her about psychedelics. And,
There you
she
go.
was a child of the 60s and she was pregnant with my sister at Woodstock. And so her idea of psychedelics were very different than the angle that we're coming from. So that's who I'd like to speak to.
Okay, that's a hard one. Maybe the folks who gave ayahuasca to Schultes when he classified ayahuasca and was about the first Westerners that brought ayahuasca and to a system of classification, and think what do they think of everything that has happened with ayahuasca? Maybe something like that.
Hmm.
And I wonder what they would say.
I wonder. Well, Bia, you've been a really great conversation. Can't wait to converse with you after this.
Absolutely. It was such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for all the important work that you're doing, that your wife is doing, that your community is doing. It's absolutely beautiful.
And just tell everybody where you're at.
You can find us at chacruna.net. I am also in Instagram, Labate Bia, or LinkedIn, and we have our social medias. We have Chacruna Latin America site. We have the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative site. We have a newsletter. We have a membership program, and we are a vibrant community. And thank you for listening, everybody.
When this goes live, we'll edit this and we'll get all those in there. So thank you very
Absolutely.
much, Bia.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bia.
Appreciate it.
Ciao. Wow, Michelle, great conversation today with Bia. Her bridging the gap between the indigenous cultures and the Western society, something kind of what we do, with everything we do in this space with Mama Dose and the plant medicine path. We've always given back. We're always giving back to these tribes. I mean, we give the 5%, right?
Absolutely. And I'm going to butcher this word because I don't know why it's so hard for me to say it, but reciprocity. Is that how we say it? The reciprocity of giving back to the tribes for these medicines is so important. These medicines come from the indigenous tribes, even the psilocybin, right? That's indigenous to all of us. We at the Plant Medicine Path and at Mama Dose and Church of the Sacred Plants and Medicine with the Metals, we give 5% of all of our proceeds to the Shawanawa tribe. They are also out of Brazil, where Dr. Labate is from.
Right.
And we give 5% back to the
It's always,
indigenous.
yeah, it's so important because the amount of 5%, what that does, maybe what $5,000 could do for them, it's pretty amazing. I mean, $5,000 would have purchased one $5,000 amount that we
They're fish
donated
ponds.
for those to their fish ponds. And, we'll show videos of these fish ponds coming up. It's pretty amazing the small amount of money, what it does for these people that have given us these cultures.
Well, and it's important to honor these medicines and to understand that they are indigenous, and we have to honor that side of it. While we are in this for the mental health aspect, there is a spirit to these medicines that must be honored.
Yeah, definitely.
Very cool talk with Dr. Bia Labate today.
Yep. She's our type of people.
She is. And really, what they need at the Chacruna Institute is funding.
Is yeah.
They need funding, just like all institutes. They need funding, and that is the biggest kind of support that they need.
It's the
Reach out
support
to
that
us.
it's the support that they all need. It's just a small amount of money.
It is, but it means a lot.
Definitely. Well, great show today, Michelle.
Absolutely.